You're fired. Effective immediately. I blinked, gripping the edge of the desk. What? But why? No warning. No explanation. Just those two cold words from Mr. Carter. The man I had worked tirelessly for. The man I had sacrificed weekends, sleep, and my sanity for. He didn't even look at me as he scribbled something on a notepad. Clear out your desk by the end of the day. My stomach twisted. This had to be a mistake. I wasn't just an employee. I was the backbone of his company. The one who picked up the slack, who solved problems before they even became problems. And now I was being thrown away like garbage. Is there a reason? Mr. Carter finally glanced up, his lips curling in a smug, dismissive smirk. It's just business. I stood there, stunned, as security escorted me out like a criminal. My coworkers didn't even meet my eyes. It was as if I had already been erased. As I stepped onto the street, the weight of it hit me. No job. No paycheck. No idea what I would do next. And then I saw it. Through the glass window of his office, Mr. Carter was shaking hands with someone new. My replacement. A kid fresh out of college, still wet behind the ears. So that was it. He thought he could replace me with someone cheaper. Fine. Let him. Let him think he won. Because one day he'd regret it. And when that day came, I'd be the one holding all the cards. 2 days before it all fell apart, I walked into the office with a smile on my face, coffee in one hand, and a promotion proposal in the other. I had spent the last 5 years building this company up, working late nights, fixing problems that weren't mine, and taking on responsibilities well above my pay grade. And finally, I was about to be rewarded for it. Morning, Rachel. I greeted the receptionist as I passed. She barely looked up. Weird. Usually, she was the first to crack a joke or complain about her weekend plans. Brushing it off, I made my way to Mr. Carter's office, excitement bubbling in my chest. I had put together a flawless proposal, a detailed plan to increase efficiency, cut costs, and expand operations. The kind of work that earned people promotions. I knocked. Come in. Mr. Carter sat behind his desk, expression unreadable. Across from him sat Ethan, the fresh out of college guy I had been mentoring. The sight made my stomach tighten, but I pushed it aside. Nothing to worry about. Sir, I have something I'd love for you to look at, I said, setting my proposal down. I've spent months analyzing our workflow, and I think I've found a way to improve productivity by 20%. Mr. Carter didn't reach for it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Ethan, why don't you step out for a moment? I shot Ethan a glance. He avoided my gaze as he grabbed his things and left. What was that about? The moment the door clicked shut, Mr. Carter exhaled. I appreciate your work, he said, in the same tone someone might use when rejecting a bad first date. I frowned. Okay, so what do you think of the proposal? His eyes flicked to the folder but didn't move to open it. We're making some changes, and unfortunately, we won't be moving forward with this. A chill ran down my spine. Something felt off. But I hesitated. I thought you wanted innovation. I mean, I've been leading projects, training new hires, and stepping up whenever needed. I even helped Ethan. A flicker of something, guilt, crossed his face, but it was gone just as fast. I know, and I appreciate that. But this is business. There it was. That same corporate nonsense excuse. I should have seen it then. The way he refused to meet my eyes. The way Ethan had scurried out of the room like a guilty kid caught stealing candy. But I didn't. Because I trusted this company. Because I had earned my place here. So I swallowed my doubt, nodded, and forced a smile. Understood. I was such an idiot. That night, I went home and told my fiancé, Jason, about the meeting. He frowned. They didn't even look at it. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Nope. Just shut it down. Jason set his fork down. That doesn't make sense. You've been their go-to person for everything. You're practically running half that office. I shrugged. Maybe they just don't see my value yet. He shook his head. Nah. Something's up. I wanted to believe he was wrong. I wanted to believe that if I kept working hard, if I just proved myself a little more, everything would turn around. I was so sure. But then 2 days later, I was staring at my termination notice while security escorted me out. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. What just happened? 1 minute, I was an essential employee, the next, I was jobless with a single piece of paper explaining my termination. Except there was no real reason for it. I opened my phone and started texting my coworker, Lisa. Me. Hey, do you know what's going on? I just got fired out of nowhere. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Lisa. I don't know anything for sure, but I think Ethan is taking your role. My stomach dropped. No. No way. That kid. The one I had trained, the one I had taught everything, was taking my job? Suddenly, every weird moment, every off interaction, every avoidance from my coworkers made sense. They had known, and not one of them had warned me. I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding in my ears. I had been blindsided, tossed aside, and the worst part, I had trusted them. I sat in my car, staring at my phone, willing it to make sense. Ethan is taking your role. Lisa's words echoed in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. I read it again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. But deep down I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a miscommunication. They had planned this. I felt numb as I scrolled through my email, searching for anything, any clue that might explain why this happened. And then I found it. An email from 3 weeks ago was forwarded to me by accident. Subject: Transition Plan, Senior Role Adjustment. My breath caught in my throat. I opened it, scanning the words at lightning speed. As discussed, Ethan will begin taking on more responsibilities in preparation for the handover. By mid-month, we will be transitioning the role entirely, and a termination will be issued accordingly. I gripped my phone so tightly that it nearly cracked. 3 weeks ago. 3. While I was busting my ass, working late nights, mentoring Ethan, and believing in a future at this company, they had already decided to replace me. And no one told me. Not Mr. Carter. Not HR. Not a single one of my so-called colleagues. They had smiled in my face while plotting behind my back. My stomach churned as I scrolled further down. Then I saw his name. Ethan. His response was short, almost casual. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to stepping into the role. Thanks for the opportunity. I wanted to be sick. He knew. He knew the whole time. Every time I helped him, every time I answered his questions, every time I covered for his mistakes, he was smiling, nodding, and waiting for me to be kicked out. I dropped my phone onto the passenger seat, my hands shaking. This wasn't just unfair. This was a betrayal. I drove home in a haze, barely remembering how I got there. Jason took one look at my face and knew. What happened? His voice was sharp, his concern immediate. I handed him my phone, unable to say the words. He read the email in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. Then, he exhaled sharply. Those! He stopped himself, pressing his lips together. Unbelievable. They planned this from the start. I nodded, my throat tight. Jason set my phone down carefully, but I could see the tension in his grip. They used you, he said, voice low with anger. Ethan used you. Hearing it out loud made it worse. I don't get it, I whispered. I gave them everything. I worked harder than anyone. I trained Ethan. Why would they do this? Jason looked at me, his expression both furious and heartbroken. Because people like Mr. Carter don't care about loyalty, he said. They care about cutting costs. And Ethan? He just wanted the easy way in. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I had spent years proving myself, years building something that meant nothing to them. And Ethan? He walked in, smiled, and took it all without a second thought. My breathing was uneven, my heart pounding. Jason reached for my hand. You deserve better than this. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It doesn't change the fact that I'm jobless. Jason squeezed my hand. No, but it means you're free. Free. I let the words sink in. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like rock bottom. But maybe rock bottom was where I needed to be. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to stay there. The next few weeks were hell. I applied for jobs, networked, sent out resumes. Nothing. The rejection emails piled up, each one another slap in the face. I tried to stay positive, but the betrayal still burned. Every time I thought about Ethan sitting at my desk, taking credit for my work, laughing with my coworkers like nothing had happened. I wanted to scream. Then one day it happened. The moment everything changed. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I was too exhausted for another rejection. But something in me said to pick up. I did. And the voice on the other end shook me to my core. "Hey, it's Mr. Carter." I sat up so fast my head spun. "Mr. Carter?" He cleared his throat. I hope you're doing well." I narrowed my eyes. Cut to the chase. A long pause. Then, "I need your help." I nearly dropped my phone. "Excuse me," I said, voice sharp. He exhaled. "Things aren't going well." Oh. This was rich. I stayed silent, letting him squirm. Finally, he continued. "Ethan he's not working out. He doesn't understand the systems, he's making costly mistakes and morale is down." I bit my tongue, fighting back a bitter laugh. Ethan was failing. I should have felt bad for him. I didn't. Mr. Carter cleared his throat again. "I was wondering if you consider coming back." There it was. The moment I had dreamed about. He fired me. He replaced me. And now, he was begging me to fix his mess. I leaned back, tapping my fingers against my desk. I could say yes. I could swoop in like a savior, clean up the disaster, and take back what was mine. Or I could let him drown. I stared at my phone, Mr. Carter's voice still ringing in my ears. "I was wondering if you consider coming back." The audacity, the sheer nerve of this man. I should have laughed, should have torn into him on the spot. But I didn't. I stayed silent, letting the weight of his words settle over me. This was my moment. I had spent weeks drowning in rejection, in anger, in the bitter taste of betrayal. And now the power was mine. "I'll have to think about it," I finally said, keeping my voice cool, unreadable. Mr. Carter exhaled in relief. "Of course. Take your time. Let's meet and discuss how we can bring you back." Bring me back. Like I was some lost puppy he suddenly cared about. I forced a polite smile into my voice. "I'll be in touch." And then I hung up. I locked my phone and stared at the wall. I should have been overjoyed. But I wasn't. Because deep down, I didn't just want an apology. I wanted justice. I wanted him to feel what I felt. I wanted them all. Mr. Carter, Ethan, every single person who had stayed silent, to realize that I was not disposable. I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. I was going to make sure they never forgot. For the next few days, I kept the news to myself. Jason noticed my shift immediately. "You're quiet," he said one evening, watching me over the rim of his coffee mug. I shrugged. "Just thinking." He narrowed his eyes. "About what?" I hesitated, then sighed. "Carter wants me back." Jason nearly choked on his coffee. "You're joking." I shook my head. "After everything," he said, incredulous. "After what they did to you." "Oh, and it gets better," I said, smiling bitterly. "Ethan's failing. The whole department's a mess." Jason let out a low whistle. "Wow. Karma works fast." "Yeah," I said, my fingers tapping against the table. "But I don't just want karma. I want a lesson." Jason leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to say yes." I scheduled the meeting for Friday morning. The office felt eerily familiar yet entirely different as I walked in. Some people looked surprised to see me. Others looked guilty. I ignored them. This wasn't a reunion. This was a reckoning. I walked into Mr. Carter's office and found him waiting, a tense smile plastered on his face. Ethan was there too. Good. I took my seat across from them, back straight, hands folded. Carter cleared his throat. "I'm really glad you're open to this." I smiled. "Of course. I'd love to discuss the terms." Ethan looked uncomfortable. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting. He knew. He knew he had stabbed me in the back, and now he was sitting across from the person he had betrayed. Mr. Carter dove into damage control mode. "We're prepared to offer you your old position back, along with a slight pay increase." I tilted my head. "A slight increase?" He hesitated. "A fair one." I let out a soft laugh. "You mean you'll pay me just enough to clean up the mess Ethan made?" Ethan flinched. Carter tensed. "That's not." "Let's be honest, Mr. Carter." I leaned forward, my eyes sharp. "You didn't fire me because I wasn't good enough. You fired me to replace me with someone cheaper." The room went silent. Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't. I turned to him, my voice deceptively calm. Tell me, Ethan. When did you know I was being fired? Before or after I helped you get settled? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I nodded. That's what I thought. Carter shifted uncomfortably. Listen, we made a mistake. I raised an eyebrow. A mistake? Carter sighed. We handled things poorly, but we're willing to make it right. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Let's talk about making it right. Ethan and Carter both perked up slightly, like dogs waiting for a treat. I smiled. They had no idea what was coming. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, watching the discomfort settle over Mr. Carter and Ethan like a thick, suffocating fog. They had expected me to walk in, desperate, eager to reclaim my job. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I tilted my head slightly. So, you want to make things right? Carter cleared his throat, putting on his best I'm a reasonable man expression. Yes, we regret how things played out, and we'd love to have you back. I raised an eyebrow. Define love. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Carter forced a chuckle. We recognize your value, and we're willing to offer you a competitive package. Competitive package. I almost laughed. I leaned forward, my voice calm. Let's cut the corporate nonsense. You need me. That's what this is about. Silence. Carter swallowed, clearly thrown off. I held up a hand. Save it. I turned to Ethan, who had been staring at the table like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. You haven't said a word, Ethan. That's not like you. What's wrong? His jaw tightened. I tilted my head, giving him a mockingly sympathetic look. You were so eager to take my job. Where's that confidence now? He looked away. Carter sighed. Let's not turn this into. I cut him off. Turn it into what? An honest conversation? Because you had no problem being dishonest when you blindsided me with a termination notice. Carter's patience was wearing thin. Look, we made a decision that in hindsight wasn't the best. But you're being given an opportunity here. You can either take it or. I smirked. Or what? He stopped. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch just long enough to watch them squirm. Then I dropped the truth bomb. You didn't fire me because of performance. You fired me because I was too expensive. Carter opened his mouth, but I kept going. You thought you could replace me with someone cheaper, someone inexperienced enough to do the work without questioning anything. Ethan flinched. I smiled bitterly. And how did that work out for you? Carter let out a slow breath. Ethan has had some challenges, yes.
But
I turned to Ethan again. Tell me, how many mistakes did you make in your first month? 10. 20. Ethan's ears turned red. He clenched his fists. How much money did the company lose because of those mistakes? I pressed. Carter's jaw tightened. There it was. The real problem. They weren't calling me back because they cared. They were calling me back because Ethan had tanked their operations. Carter tried to regain control of the conversation. We're willing to move forward from all of this. Start fresh. You'll have your role back. You'll be compensated fairly. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. See, here's the thing, Mr. Carter. You don't get to decide when we move forward. He frowned. I stood up slowly, planting my hands on the table. You humiliated me. You treated me like I was disposable. And now, because you're desperate, you want me to come back and fix your disaster. Ethan looked down, shame finally settling in. I turned to him. And you. You sat across from me every day, acting like I was helping you, while you were waiting for me to get the axe. You never even had the decency to warn me. His mouth opened and closed. I didn't. I tilted my head. Didn't what? Didn't know? Or didn't care? He had no answer. Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. Listen, you're still upset. I laughed, shaking my head. Oh, Carter, I'm not upset. I leaned in slightly. I'm just done. His brows furrowed. Meaning you can take your job offer, I said, grabbing my bag, and shove it. I turned toward the door. Ethan let out a breath, probably relieved that I wasn't staying. But I wasn't done. I turned back one last time, smiling. Oh, and by the way, I said, pausing just long enough to watch Carter lift his head. I just had lunch with your biggest client yesterday. His eyes widened. What? I shrugged. Yeah. Turns out, they're looking for a company that knows what they're doing. Carter's face drained of color. Ethan's mouth fell open. I smiled sweetly. So enjoy watching your company burn. And with that, I walked out. I walked out of that office lighter than I had felt in months. For weeks, I had been drowning in anger, betrayal, and the weight of everything they had done to me. But now I was free. They had expected me to come crawling back. They thought I'd be desperate enough to accept whatever scraps they threw my way. They were wrong. As I stepped outside, the winter air was crisp, sharp, invigorating. I took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time since getting fired, I felt in control. A few days later, the fallout began. Jason and I were sitting on the couch when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Mr. Carter. I snorted, shaking my head. Wow. He doesn't get it. Jason raised an eyebrow. You gonna answer? I sighed, considering it. Then, for entertainment purposes, I put it on speaker. Hello. Carter's voice was tight. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot the other day. Jason bit back a laugh. I leaned back into the cushions, crossing my legs. Did we? Because I remember it pretty clearly. Carter exhaled sharply. Look, we're in a tough spot. Our client contracts are shaky and productivity has dropped significantly. Translation, they were screwed. And, I said, pretending I didn't already know where this was going. He hesitated. If you reconsider, if you come back, we can renegotiate. Jason covered his mouth, stifling his laughter. I grinned. Oh, I've reconsidered. Carter perked up. Really? Yeah, I said, stretching my legs out. And the answer is still no. Silence. I could almost hear his eye twitching. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice tight. You won't find another opportunity like this. I laughed. Oh, Carter, I said, shaking my head. I already have. I wasn't lying. The same client that Carter was so desperate to keep, they had offered me a contract, a better deal, a real leadership role. And the best part? They wanted me to help them find a new company to partner with, which meant Carter's company, officially irrelevant. I hung up before he could sputter another excuse. Jason let out a low whistle. Damn. That was satisfying. I smiled. It was. The next week, I signed my new contract. More money, more respect, more control over my future. And best of all, no more people who treated me like I was disposable. Ethan, Mr. Carter, the entire toxic environment I had been stuck in for years gone. And I didn't miss it. Not one bit. A month later, I heard from Lisa. She messaged me late at night. Lisa, you won't believe what happened. I smirked. Oh, I had a pretty good guess. Me. Carter finally crashed and burned. Lisa. Worse. The company is shutting down. I raised an eyebrow. Well. Lisa. Clients pulled out. Staff quit. Ethan couldn't handle the job. It's all over. I took a slow sip of my wine, completely unbothered. Me. Shame. Lisa sent a laughing emoji. Karma's fast, huh? I smiled. Faster than they ever saw coming. Later that night, as I lay in bed, Jason pulled me close. You good, he murmured. I thought about everything. How broken I had felt when I was fired. How angry and helpless I had been. And how now I was better than ever. I smiled. Yeah, I whispered. I'm good, because for the first time in a long time, I had chosen me, and it felt damn good. A year ago, if someone had told me that losing my job would be the best thing to ever happen to me, I would have laughed in their face. Back then, my entire identity was tied to that job. I was the reliable one, the problem solver, the person who went above and beyond. I thought loyalty meant something. But I learned the hard way. Some people will take everything you give and still replace you the second it benefits them. Now, I don't waste my energy proving my worth to people who never valued me in the first place. My new job wasn't just a step up. It was a whole new world. I was surrounded by people who respected me. Where my ideas weren't just acknowledged, they were implemented. Where my hard work wasn't exploited, it was rewarded. For the first time in years, I woke up excited for work. I took vacations without guilt. I logged off at 5 p.m. and didn't spend my evenings answering last-minute emails. I had balance. I had control. I had peace. One afternoon, I got a LinkedIn notification. New connection request, Ethan. I let out a short laugh. Of course. Curious, I clicked on his profile. His job title no longer said Operations Manager. It said, Open to work. I stared at the screen for a moment, then simply deleted the request. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. A few months later, I ran into Lisa at a networking event. She hugged me tightly. You look amazing. I barely recognized you. I grinned. Turns out, removing toxic people from your life is great for the skin. She laughed. I still can't believe how everything went down. I shrugged. I can. They thought they could replace me. They learned otherwise. Lisa shook her head, a smirk playing on her lips. You know, Carter tried to start another company. I raised an eyebrow. And? She chuckled. Didn't even last 6 months. I nodded, unsurprised. Some people never learn. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, sipping a glass of wine as the city lights sparkled below. Jason came outside, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. Penny for your thoughts? I smiled, just thinking about how different life is now. His eyes softened. You're happier. I am, I admitted, because I finally realized something. Jason tilted his head. What's that? I looked out at the city, my heart full, my mind clear. I spent years trying to prove my worth to the wrong people. Now, I don't have to prove anything to anyone. Jason smiled. That's my girl.